Hey guys, welcome to the Drew Show, episode 2, and today I'm talking about why I think modern Christians are lazy. And this video isn't meant to attack these Christians or push them down or judge them, but instead pick them up, show them a better way, try to teach them. And many of these problems I'm going to talk about today where Christians are being lazy is something that I used to do, I used to have a problem with, I didn't fully understand. So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about today comes from personal experience. And I think that's something that's very powerful and it's very important to talk about. And the first thing I want to talk about is a question I get asked all the time by new Christians or non-denominational Christians or really anyone interested in the Christian faith. And they ask me, is it necessary to go to church to be saved? Do you have to physically go in every Sunday to Mass to be saved? It's a fair question. But I think before we answer that question, it's important to ask why people aren't going to church in the first place. And most of the time, it's because of hypocrites. It's because of bad experiences. It's because they don't feel safe in that church because there's people that go to church, but they aren't truly living out that faith. They aren't truly doing what Christianity preaches. And in fact, they're not doing what they preach. They go there, they talk down to other people, and it feels like I'm just getting lectured at about how bad I am. That's a fair point about church. Many people feel that way. But it's important to realize when you're going to church and you have faith in Jesus, it's not about the other people there. It's about your faith in Jesus. It's about the truth. That is the most important part about Christianity. And it's very important to not let a bad example of Christianity push you away from Jesus. And to answer the question about going to church isn't necessary for salvation, well, technically no, it's not necessary for salvation, but is it an important way to express your faith and grow in faith? I think it's very important to go to church to grow in community and deepen your faith. And it's important to choose the right one because there might be a church with many hypocrites and it might not be a good experience for you. But if you find the right church and right community to plug into and talk about Jesus with, it can be very powerful and help you grow your faith. And I know for me, for a very long time, I didn't go to church. I didn't think it was important. I thought I could just read my Bible and that was my way to heaven. But then I realized that I looked at my faith in Jesus Christ not as a true relationship, but instead as a declaration. I was going to declare I had faith in Jesus, and that could save me. And that's not true. A declaration of faith is not going to save you. You have to live out that faith every single day. And I think that's a very important point about going to church, is that it's important to live out your faith. It's important to seek Jesus and work to Jesus. Because Jesus, yes, he worked to us. He paid the price for us. But that doesn't mean we just declare we have faith in him and we let him do all the work. No, we got to work to Jesus. And I think that's something very important that modern Christians don't really look at. And I think that directly connects to church attendance. And when I started to go to church, I started to feel God on a whole nother level. And when you're surrounded by so many other people that are Christians, it's a really good sense of community. And I highly recommend that people go to church. But on the other hand, another big problem in modern Christianity is not people just leaving the church, but leaving the faith altogether. And again, that's because of hypocrites. It's because of bad experiences. And I think as someone who goes to church, once you get yourself to go to church, I think then it's very important to be a good example. Don't be that person that pushes someone away from God. Don't be that guy. Be genuine in faith, live out your faith, and be a good person when you're at Mass. Encourage people. Don't talk down to people. And I think that's a very important issue in the denominational talk. I think it's very important not to talk down to people, not to criticize people, not to try to win the argument, but instead try to win the people. Try to teach the people. Try to show them your perspective. And I think that's something very important when you go to church, is to not push people away from Jesus, not push other people away from God, because that can be really destructive and scar someone for life and to the point where they don't want to come back to church. They don't want to give God another chance. And I think that's something that's very important to keep track of. And yeah, I'm just taking a look at my notes here because for this podcast, I wanted to try something new. I wanted to make sure I had all my notes here so I wouldn't miss anything I wanted to talk about. But yeah, to that point about people who completely leave the faith, I think it's very important that instead of having your faith rely on such an emotional standard and how other people act, I think it's very important to have your faith be based in truth and not in feeling. Just because some bad Christians don't make you feel like God exists doesn't mean he actually does not exist. And I think it's very important to seek the truth and to really dig your teeth into the gospel. See if they're reliable. See if Jesus actually lived and if Jesus actually rose from the dead. I think that's the most important part about Christianity is solidifying these truths. Because if you solidify that truth, no matter what experience you have with a bad Christian, it doesn't matter. It is true. So I think that's the most important thing you can possibly do as a Christian is seek truth. Don't just be a Christian because of feeling and emotion. Be a Christian because you understand the truth. And that is the strongest way to keep your faith and to grow in faith. And I think that's something that's very important. And yeah, to that point, I think many people leave the faith because it's hard to live out the faith today. There's this whole dynamic between culture versus Christianity, and it's not very popular to be a Christian. As much as Christianity is on the comeback and many people are coming back to Christianity, it's still not popular to live the way that Jesus wants us to live. And many people who call themselves Christians, like we said before, are hypocrites. They don't really live how Jesus wants them to live. It's not popular to wait until marriage. It's not popular not to get drunk, not to get high. That's not popular, especially for young people. That's all people want to do. They want to get high. They want to get drunk. They want to forget about their problems. And this is a bigger problem today than it's ever been because depression rates are up. Anxiety is up. All these bad things are on the rise for Gen Z right now. So it's very hard for us to live out this faith for many reasons, and that's the big one right there, is the depression, the anxiety, the social pressure from other people. No, don't wait until marriage. Do this now. God will just forgive you later. And the truth is, we live in a more transactional world than we've ever lived in. People give, people take. That's how it goes. But that's not the way Jesus wants us to live. Jesus doesn't want us to be transactional, but Jesus also doesn't want us to be immoral and live our life separate from him and do things that separate us from him, like having premarital sex, like getting drunk, like getting high. Jesus doesn't want this for us. And I think the best way you can possibly live out your faith in a culture like ours today is to find a community, is to go to church, is to have that strong knit community that you can rely on. And I think that's why going to church is so important, because all the pressures of our culture don't exist there. Everyone there believes in a similar thing. They want to be a good person. They want to live out their faith just like you. So I think it's very important to get a close-knit group of Christian friends. And honestly, a group that keeps you accountable, because it's very important to correct people, but also not be judgmental. And I think this is a very soft spot in modern Christianity. We don't like to correct people. We don't like to tell people that they're wrong and that they're living away from Jesus. But I think that's very important in a small-knit group of Christians. Be honest with people. Find those people that you can have those tough conversations with and you can help grow in faith. And I think that's very important because we all know Christianity is true, right? If you're a Christian, you know it's the truth. But the reason why that truth is so hard to live out is because of all this culture and society's pressure on us to live a whole different life. And I think it's spiritual warfare. I think it's the devil. And I'm not saying the people that live that kind of life are the devil. They're obviously living an immoral life, but they aren't the devil. But I think that's how the devil tempts us. He can use other people in different ways. And that's why it's important to have a group you can go to and have a group that can hold you accountable and you can hold them accountable. I think that's very important in today's age. And when you feel pressured by society, it's very important to realize that Christianity is not meant to be easy. Following Jesus is not meant to be easy. No, it's meant to be extremely hard. God's standard is impossible. Read the whole entire New Testament. That's all it's about, is people trying to work their way to God and failing over and over again. So we know that standard is impossible. But that doesn't mean we should be comfortable in sin. No, we should not be comfortable in sin. We should strive to live out our faith in the best way possible. So yes, it's a very hard game. It's very hard to live out your faith perfectly, and it's impossible to live it perfectly. But it is very important to live it the best way we can and challenge ourselves to be the best Christians we can be, to be as Christ-like as we can possibly be. Because Christianity was not meant to be easy, but it's definitely worth it. The salvation, Jesus Christ, the way he can help us, it's definitely worth it, but it's not easy. And good things do not come easy. And it's no different with Jesus. And all those combination of thoughts have really been on my heart lately, and I really wanted to share those. But I think for the rest of this podcast, I want to dive into the misconceptions about God today. And I think one thing many Christians struggle with today is we're told we're supposed to have a relationship with God, right? It's not about the religion. It's about just having a relationship with God. But many people struggle to feel God. Many people struggle to hear God. When they're praying to him, it does not feel like he's listening. Our life has not changed. It still sucks, right? Nothing has changed. God hasn't changed my life in any way. I'm not getting any reward. I'm not getting anything I asked for. And I think that's the very important part right there, asking for stuff. Because yes, in prayer, you should ask God as many things as you want, but you should also utilize prayer not as just a wish list, not as your shopping cart, right? But you should utilize prayer to get to know God, to tell God about your life. Tell God when you're angry. Tell God when you're happy. Tell God when you feel alone. Tell God all these things. But then, just like any good relationship, you can dump all of that stuff right? You can dump all of your emotions into God, but it's also very important to listen to God. Tell God, here's what I want, right? I want all of this stuff, and I'm asking you for all of this stuff, but what do you want from me, God? Truly, what do you want in my life? Do you want me to go this way? Do you want me to go that way? Is this really the best thing for me? Because something I do in my prayer is I ask for all these things, right? I want all of these things, all of these big, important things that mean a lot to me. But then at the end, I always ask God, if it's worth it, yes, please give it to me. But if it's not worth it, if it's going to destroy me, no, don't give it to me. Because I feel like many of us ask God for things that are going to be destructive, and we just don't know it. It's like asking your parents to buy you drugs. Your parents aren't actually going to give you the drugs, right? They're going to keep the drugs away from you because they know it's going to harm you. Just like God, if you ask God for something that's going to harm you, He's not going to give it to you. He's going to be a good father. He's going to keep that away from you, and he's going to protect you. And I think that's very important to realize when we're asking for things. And another thing to keep in mind is our free will. God limits his power, gives us free will, and he doesn't control everything, right? Everything that happens in our life is not from God. Sure, some things are, and I think many things can be, but not everything that's in our life is from God. And I think that's the reality of the world because, yes, we have free will. We can make choices. Everyone around us can make choices. So everything that happens in our life is not because of God. All right. So it's very important that, yes, we can make this wish list and maybe a few of the things will come true, but a lot of the things aren't. And it's a combination of maybe it's not good for us. We have free will, so it's not guaranteed. But ultimately, we don't really know exactly what it is, right? This is the mystery of faith. We don't understand it on that deep of a level. But it's very important to know that God's always listening, right? He might feel distant, but I promise you, he is always listening. And as someone who has grown up a Christian, right? I used to be a Christian when I was really young. I never really felt God. And that was one reason why I really drove myself away from the faith. I didn't feel God in prayer. I didn't feel his presence. And something that's brought me back in was seeking truth, like we talked about before. I understood that Jesus has to be the truth because of all the evidence backing up Jesus. But then I let Jesus in. And there have been probably a handful of prayers where I truly felt the presence of God. And now it doesn't happen all the time. I think it's impossible to happen every single time you pray. But there are definitely a handful of moments in my life where I truly felt like God was there. And it's a very hard state to get into. It's very hard to feel God's presence. But when it happens, you know you're not mistaken. You know God's really there. And it's something that's very special. It feels really good. And yeah, I think that's very important. But I think in prayer, just dumping your heart on God, letting God know how you feel, being honest with God, but then also not making the prayer only about you, right? But incorporating God and asking God what he wants from you. I think that is a very powerful way to go about prayer, is to just have an open conversation, an open line. Like you're on the phone with God, just tell God what's going on in your life. Ask him for help, ask him for what you want, but also ask him for what he wants. And I think that's something that is very important. Another note I have on here is, why do some prayers go unanswered? And I know I kind of answered that before, but I think it's very important that even though God limits his power, he does have a plan for us. He does have a will for us. Even though some things can interfere, like our free will, God does have a plan and he does have his own will for us. So sometimes God can take things away from us or prevent things from happening to us to help satisfy his will. But ultimately, if God did that too much, if he stopped too many things, or if he put too many things in our life, he would be infringing on our free will. So there's a balance that God uses. He uses divine sovereignty every now and then to sprinkle a few things in our life, prevent a few things. I definitely think that happens. But he also gives us free will. So that's why some bad things happen. That's why we don't get some good things. That's why some prayers go unanswered, is because there's some sort of balance in the universe. Divine sovereignty and free will. And it's a mystery how God uses this. But I know for sure that it is some divine sovereignty, because some things have happened in my life and I've seen miracles happen in other people's life where it just can't be changed. It's got to be from God. But I've also seen some very terrible things happen to people. I've had terrible things happen to me, and I don't think that's from God. That can't be from God. That has to be from our fallen nature of this world and also our free will. So I think that's very important when we look at prayers going unanswered, is that God is all powerful, right? But he limits that power and he allows us free will, which means that everything that happens is not because of him. And this actually goes perfectly with the next topic I have here, and that's, why does Christianity feel like a burden sometimes? Isn't it supposed to be a blessing? And yeah, it's supposed to be a blessing and it is a blessing. But I think sometimes as a Christian, we get so run down with rules, right? We get so worried about legalism and what is right and what is wrong. And as important as that is, I think sometimes it's important to go back to the basics. Have a conversation with God, right? Don't get too overwhelmed with what's going on. Ask God to take away that anxiety when you feel exhausted, when you feel overwhelmed. And I think instead of just checking which rules you follow, I think it's very important just to try to grow your relationship with God. And then that way, those boxes will naturally check themselves. You will naturally just be acting more Jesus-like because you grew your faith in Him, right? So I think it's very important first to focus on that relationship. Instead of focusing on all the rules and all the sins you must not do, you should first just focus on your relationship with God and try to get to know God better. Because if you do that, if that is first things first, is the relationship, well, then everything else is just going to come naturally. Because if you have genuine faith in Jesus, you're not going to want to do those things, right? You're not going to want to get drunk. You're not going to want to have premarital sex. If you get to truly know Jesus in your heart genuinely, you're not going to want to do these things. And when you catch yourself craving these things, because we are human, you're going to say, no, my relationship with God means more to me than this temptation. And I think when we're feeling exhausted, it's because we're too worried about checking those boxes. We're too worried about following all these rules, when instead we should realize that having a relationship with God, it frees us more than it restricts us. Many people think when they come to Christianity, it's just a rule book. It's something that's going to restrict their freedom. They don't think it's something that can give them freedom. No, that's not the way they look at it. But I promise you, if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you live the way He wants you to live. It's the ultimate freedom. It's the ultimate peace. It's the ultimate everything. And I'm not saying that your problems and your anxiety and your stress is automatically going to go away. I can't make that promise. But I can promise you your life will be more fulfilling. You'll have more purpose. That I can guarantee. When you put your faith in Jesus and you grow a relationship with Jesus, I can guarantee you that your purpose will feel stronger. You'll feel more fulfilled in life. But those problems that you have and all these bad things that are happening to you, that's something you got to work out with Jesus. And I know it's possible, but it's not guaranteed, right? Back to that free will and divine sovereignty kind of thing. It's not guaranteed, but I know you can work on it with Jesus and it can happen, right? But I think when you feel exhausted in faith and when you feel stressed and you have anxiety, I think it's very important to go back to basics, right? Just focus on Jesus, right? Keep your eyes on Jesus. And I think actually that reminds me, that picture right back there, for those of you who are listening to this podcast and you're not actually here, I have a picture right behind me. I don't know if you can see it. I think now you can see it right there. That is Jesus walking on water. And I have that posted right on my door, right? Let me get back in here. I have that picture right on my door. And if you don't know, I film these videos in my room. And every day when I get up, my bed is right behind this camera right here. Every day I wake up, the first thing I do is look right there, right at that picture, because that symbolizes keeping your eyes on God. And that whole Bible story does. When Jesus walks on water and he invites Peter in, he says, Peter, walk on water with me. I'm God. You can trust me. It is me, Jesus. Walk on water. Peter gets out of the boat. He takes a leap of faith. He puts himself in the water. And he's walking on water. He believes in Jesus. He's looking at Jesus. He's keeping his eyes on Jesus. But then storms start to come in and Peter starts to get scared. Adversity hits and Peter takes his eyes off of God. He starts to look at what is making him so exhausted, what's stressing him out. And that's the storm. He starts to look at the storm. He starts to look at the bad weather, all the wind. And when he takes his eyes off Jesus, he starts to sink. When he gets overwhelmed about all these storms all over him, he starts to sink in the water. And that's what happens to us in our life. We take that leap of faith, we put our faith in Jesus, and we start walking on water and doing these crazy, miraculous things, right? But then we take our eyes off of Jesus when stress hits, when that bad weather comes in, when it's a dark time in our life. We take our eyes off of Jesus, and then we start to sink. And that's overwhelming. But the story doesn't end there, right? Peter doesn't end up drowning, but who knows? If you don't readjust your eyes to Jesus, you definitely can drown. But Peter doesn't drown. Peter readjusts his focus. He puts his eyes back on Jesus, and Jesus gets his hand, picks him up, and saves him. And that's what happens with us too. We can put our faith in Jesus, we can keep our eyes on him, and we could walk on water with Jesus, do miraculous things, start movements, start businesses that really help our world. But just as easily, when the bad weather comes in, when the adversity hits, we can take our eyes off of Jesus and we can start to sink and be drowning. And I think that happens when we're exhausted as Christians. We get exhausted because we take our eyes off Jesus, right? And that causes us to drown. And it's overwhelming. But when we start to drown, it's very important to refocus our eyes on Jesus, let him save us, bring us back up, and allow us to take that leap of faith once again and walk on water with him. And for me, it's very powerful every day to wake up and look at that painting, look at that image of Jesus walking on water, and think of myself. Am I keeping my eyes on God today? Have I, in the past, yesterday, did I keep my eyes on God? Is what I'm doing keeping my eyes on that man over there, Jesus Christ? And it's something that's very powerful and a story that really touches my heart that I think explains this whole thing perfectly about being exhausted. When we feel exhausted, we should put our eyes on God more than anything else. And yeah, that's really cool that I could incorporate that painting today. I swear it was not planned, right? But the phrase eye on God, right? Keeping your eyes on God, boom, always reminds me of that one right there. So not planned at all, by the way. I'm quite flattered, actually, that came to me. And I don't think, actually, this is a really good point right here. I don't think that popping in my brain is all me, and I don't want to be prideful and own it, because before I hit record on this camera, I talked to God. I said, God, please be with me when I'm recording this podcast, right? Use me to speak to your people and really help me explain these ideas to people to help them understand, and be with me, speak through me, use me. I want to be a tool on your tool belt, God. That's what I said, and I truly believe that's the Holy Spirit working right there, bringing that idea back to my head, bringing that Bible story back, and I think that's something that's worth sharing. So yeah, that's why that painting's there. It really helps me and helps me keep my focus on God, right? And I think that's the most important thing you can do when you feel stress and anxiety. And someone who's gone through a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety in my life. Many people don't expect me. I'm not the one that people would expect to go through all that anxiety and stress and all of that good stuff, but I have gone through it. And I think it's very important that when you're in the middle of it, to keep your eyes on God, because ultimately when we have that stress, when we have that anxiety, it's because our eyes are not on God and we're drowning. And sometimes those natural events will happen in our lives that we don't really like. And that's that wind and that bad weather that came in for Peter. That's not because of us. Sometimes stressful events enter our life, but it's very important when those stressful events come to keep our eyes on God the whole time. Nothing else is important. Everything out here is not important. Keep your eyes on God. And that's something that's really helped me. That's a principle that I use all the time that has really helped me stay afloat, right? Dominate life, walk on water, do extraordinary things. And yeah, I'm really glad I was able to share that. Actually, I was not planning on sharing that, but I'm glad I did. Moving on from that, another thing I wanted to talk about on here was the struggle of following Jesus when you honestly don't feel like it. And it sounds bad, right? But I can confidently say in my life there have been times where I don't feel like following God, right? And like I said before, Christianity is not easy to do. It's meant to be hard because it's worth it. And there are days in my life where I don't feel like following God, right? I want to live life my own way. I don't want to follow all of these rules, right? The legalism part. I don't want to do all of those things. And there are days that I know many of you probably don't feel like being a Christian. Many of you guys don't feel like following God, but I think it's very important on those days to realize that our faith in Jesus should not be limited to the rewards we get, right? We should have faith in Jesus because he's the truth, not because of what we get from Jesus. And I think that's something that's very important. Instead of worrying about what God can give us, we should be worried about what we can give God in the world. And I think many of us are hardwired to think about what we can get, right? What can the world give us, right? What can we get out of the world instead of what we can give to the world, right? I think that's so much more powerful, is thinking about what we can give, right? Instead of what we can get. And I think when you give more, you actually end up getting more too. Because when you can give to people, it's not just the physical rewards and the worldly stuff that you get with it in return, but it's also just the feeling of helping people, right? I think the feeling of helping people is very powerful. But anyway, when you're in that slump, right, I think it's very important to, once again, keep your eyes on God, but also get back to basics, right? When you feel absolutely overwhelmed and you don't want to follow Jesus anymore because it's too hard, focus on the basics. Pray to God, read your Bible, do all of the basic things. Don't worry about checking that list. Just do the basic stuff. Pray to God, ask God for help, ask God to put you back on the right path. And I know for me, many times when I don't feel like being a Christian, whether it's from society's pressure or I just had a bad experience with a hypocrite, no matter what it is, I've found some other practical ways to help me get through it. And one of them is turning off what you're probably watching this podcast on right now, and that is your phone. Sometimes it's as simple as just clicking off that phone and experiencing the world, right? I think that phone is a stress machine. I think that anxiety and exhaustion comes from that phone because that phone is constant information, right? Boom, boom, boom. Constantly what's going on in the world. This is what's bad. This is what's good. And unfortunately, many things that are on there aren't good, right? It's a lot of here's what's bad in the world. Here's all this negative stuff. And I think that stresses us out. And I think many of us don't even realize it because phones have become so normalized just to be out all the time, right? But I think it's very important to put away the phone when we're feeling exhausted or we're feeling stressed or we don't feel like following Jesus. Put away the phone. Just look around, experience the world. And I promise you, it sounds stupid, right? What's putting away my phone? How's that going to help me? But I promise you, just click off your phone, right? Turn it off. Just connect with the world and connect with God. And I think sometimes that can be very powerful. And I think another strategy you can try is just sleeping, right? Take a nap. If it's nighttime, I know for me, I get exhausted a lot and I don't feel like following God at night most of the time. I just went through a hard day and I just don't feel like doing anything. I have all this work I need to do, all the stress that comes from being a content creator, all of that stuff, all the comments, all the negative comments, all the hate. And I'm just exhausted, it's the end of the day. And I think going to bed and getting a good night's sleep is very important during those times. And I'll put down everything I'm doing, even though there's a hard deadline of tomorrow. I want to get this out tomorrow. I'll just tend to myself, right? I'll tend to my faith and I'll tend to God by getting a good night's rest, refreshing, going to sleep and waking up. And I think sometimes it's important when you're having a bad day and you're having something push you away from God, just end it right there, right? And I don't mean it like that. I just mean end the day, wake up, and have a fresh new day in front of you tomorrow. And I think that's very important. And it's helped me a lot. Sometimes I just need to turn off upstairs and just stop thinking, relax, go to bed, and charge up that battery for the next day. And the next thing I wanted to get into, this is something I've heard from many people actually as of late. So I wanted to put it in here. And if this helps you, great. This is, what if I'm doing everything right? What if I'm living the way Jesus wants me to live, but it still feels like God's far from me? I still don't feel it. And I think I've done a good job answering this question throughout this whole entire podcast, right? We started out about Christians being lazy, all of that stuff. But if you're truly applying yourself and doing everything right, shouldn't everything else fall in line? Shouldn't we start to feel God's presence? Like I said, in my life, I've only had a handful of times where I can confidently say I felt God's presence. And I think the mystery of faith is, why does it feel like God's distant a lot, right? If God was truly real, why wouldn't he just tell us? And that's the tough part about faith, because if God were to come down and tell us he exists, he wouldn't be giving us free will. We would be forced to believe in him because he's telling us he exists. But the hard part about faith in Christianity is that God does not do that. But that's what makes it rewarding, right? God gives us that choice to believe in him, and from that we can get salvation. And even when it feels like we're doing everything possibly right and God is still not there, it's important to realize that he is there, but he moves in mysterious ways, and there's really no good answer to that. And I've definitely felt like that at some point, where it's like, I've been on such a good run here. I've been really locked in, doing my best with God, but it just feels like he's not here. He's not listening. He's somewhere else. And there's no good answer to that, really. It sucks, but it's a mystery of faith that's hard to comprehend. But God moves in very mysterious ways. and spiritual dryness happens. And I think when it happens, it's very important. If you can get anything from this podcast, it's to get back to the basics, right? Don't overwhelm yourself with all these secondary things. Just get back to the basics, get back to the truth, right? And start putting your eyes on God. I think that's very important when we're going through times like this. Very common theme of this podcast, but I think it's very important. And then I want to talk about, is Christianity still worth it, right? We talked today about modern Christians, why they're lazy, right? We started a little bit in the front of the podcast talking about why Christians in modern times can be lazy. And then we went into how God moves, right? Misconceptions about God. And after all of that, is it still worth it to be a Christian? If there are hypocrites and if it's hard to feel God's presence, is it even worth it to be a Christian? And I think it is, right? I think the path of most resistance most of the time in this world is the best path to take. And I confidently can say I think Christianity is worth it, because if it's true, what's the alternative, right? Choosing hell, you really think that's worth it? Living your life the way you want to now, but then later on going to hell, having this temporary pleasure, but an eternity of suffering? I don't think that's very smart. So I definitely think it is worth it to be a Christian. But wow, this was a whirlwind of thoughts on this episode. I know we're somewhat wrapping up here, but there are a few things I want to talk about before we end. And number one, it's Lent. And I don't know when this is going to come out. I really hope it's before Easter Sunday. But a little update on me. If you watch the first podcast, ultra processed foods is something I've struggled with, staying in shape, all of that stuff. I'm happy to announce that I actually gave up ultra processed food for Lent, and I'm going strong. Right now, we're about 2 weeks into Lent, have not had any ultra processed food, and I haven't gone to the gym, right? That's something else I wanted to do. Haven't done that yet, but I'll get there. I'll get to the gym. I'll start working out. I'll start getting back into shape as best as I possibly can. And if there's any content you want to see in the gym, comment down below if you're interested in that. I think that could be something that would be cool. It'd be a little extra incentive to go to the gym, a little extra support to go to the gym. Just to recap on how my life's been, the future of this channel, all of this stuff, I'm really excited to get going with this podcast, and I think it's opening up many doors, and it's great, and it's a blessing, and I want to thank all the people who have supported me this last year, and I think things are going to start heating up on this channel. I'm going to start stepping out and being more firm in my faith. I think before I like to use to tippy toe around. I want to be bold now. I have a calling to be more bold about my faith, speak truth. And I think that's going to be a theme on this channel, is truth. And I know this summer I've got a lot of content lined up for in real life kind of stuff, IRL kind of deal, where I want to stand strong in faith in Jesus Christ. And I can't wait for all of this. I can't wait for this channel to expand, do many different things. And yeah, it wouldn't be possible without you guys. So I really want to say thank you to the people who have supported me for a very long time. And yeah, I don't want to keep you guys for any longer. So thank you guys for watching. And this is Drew signing out. Drew Show, episode 2. And we'll see you guys in episode 3. So see you guys. Peace.